My name is Lisa Hartwell, and there's a truth most people never want to hear. Not every search ends with a rescue. I know that because my own family lived it. Years ago, my brother went missing in the Blue Ridge Mountains during a college hiking trip. We searched for 36 hours before we found him dehydrated, hypothermic, but alive. And it was a search and rescue team that brought him back to us. That moment changed me forever. I decided to become a SAR volunteer, to do for others what someone once did for my family. For nearly a decade, I've worked searches across the mountains of western North Carolina and eastern Tennessee, answering dozens of calls. But there was one case that taught me something I never wanted to believe. Some rescue calls are never meant to succeed. That was the Morrison case. According to the official SAR record, the Morrison operation was straightforward. David and Karen Morrison were located safe. They declined assistance and chose to continue their planned hike. The file was stamped, closed, a successful mission, a happy ending. But I swear on my own life, the truth was nothing like that. I was the one who saw them. Or rather, what was pretending to be them. Two figures with blank faces, empty sockets fitted with glass lenses, speaking in Karen's voice like a distorted recording. "We're safe. Please tell our family." I saw cameras embedded in the forest, growing out of trees, rock faces, even the ground itself, tracking my every move. I walked into a valley that doesn't exist on any map, where everything, the landscape, the campsite, looked real but felt hollow, stripped of any human presence. And yet the final report reduced it all to a single, tidy sentence, erasing everything I witnessed. Just like the photos I'd taken when I got back, all of them showed nothing but empty forest. They said the Morrisons were safe, but I know they never came back. David and Karen Morrison weren't reckless adventurers. They had over 20 years of experience hiking the Appalachians, knew every mile of those trails like the backs of their hands. Before leaving, they filed a detailed itinerary with the ranger station, complete with their loop route, nightly campsites, and scheduled call-in time to check on their daughter. They carried full gear: tent, cooking supplies, rain covers, first aid kit, even a handheld GPS unit. In other words, they were the definition of responsible hikers, the kind we in SAR call pros. People like them don't just wander off trail. Getting lost was almost impossible. But one September morning, their daughter called to report them missing after her parents failed to check in as scheduled. From that moment, the Morrison case officially began. A case that would shatter every rule we thought we knew. By Wednesday morning, our team assembled at the trailhead. 12 volunteers, 2 German Shepherd search dogs with hundreds of successful missions behind them, and a helicopter on standby overhead. Conditions were nearly perfect: clear skies, mild temperatures, no rain, no fog. If ever there was a mission almost guaranteed to succeed, this was it. We started out along the exact route David and Karen had registered. At first, it felt like one of those straightforward searches you hope for. Find 2 experienced hikers, bring them back to their family, and everyone breathes easy. But from the very first steps onto that trail, I had no idea just how far the Morrison search would veer away from everything we expected. For the first 8 miles, everything looked perfectly normal. We found small but steady signs of their presence. A granola bar wrapper, boot prints pressed deep into the mud, even a dropped camera with a photo of a scenic overlook still time-stamped on the memory card. Every clue pointed to them staying right on course, not straying, not lost. But at mile marker 12, the trail stopped telling their story. Not faded, not covered by rocks or fallen leaves. Stopped. Right there, in the middle of the path, as if David and Karen Morrison had simply ceased to exist, mid-stride. We widened our search, combing through brush and rocky outcrops, hoping they'd taken a side path. But the search dogs, trained to follow scent long after footprints disappear, couldn't track anything past that point. They barked a few times, then sat down, whining, turning back toward where we'd come from, refusing to move forward. Tom Bradley, our team leader with 15 years of SAR experience, stood staring at the empty trail and shook his head. "This doesn't make sense. People don't just vanish like this." But that was only the beginning of the things that didn't make sense. While the rest of the team argued over how to expand the search radius, my eyes caught on something strange attached to the trunk of a tree. It was a small digital camera, mounted about 8 feet up on the trunk. Long lens, weatherproof casing, even a solar panel to keep it running. I looked around, and my stomach dropped. It wasn't just one. Dozens of them, identical cameras spaced evenly, their fields of view overlapping until the entire stretch of forest around us was covered. A complete surveillance grid. I immediately called out, "Tom, look, someone's installed a whole camera system out here." The team stopped, heads tilting up in unison. But then, their faces shifted to confusion. "Lisa, what are you pointing at?" "There's nothing there. Just branches." I froze, a cold sweat crawling down my back. Because right in front of me, the lenses were moving mechanical whirs as they refocused with every shift of my body. I could read the serial numbers engraved on their casings, see the tiny red LEDs pulsing, recording. But to my teammates, they were invisible. I told myself maybe it was exhaustion, maybe stress playing tricks on my vision. But it was too clear, too detailed to be a hallucination. And from that moment on, I knew this search had crossed into territory science couldn't explain. On the second day of the mission, we found the first Morrison campsite exactly where their itinerary said it should be. At first glance, it was perfect. Too perfect. The tent was pitch tight, guidelines straight, stakes driven deep like an instructional manual. Backpacks, clothes, and gear were laid out with magazine-level neatness. Cooking pots polished, no soot, no food stains. The stove wiped clean, as if it had never been used. Even the hiking boots were placed neatly side by side outside the tent flap. It looked like an illustration in a camping brochure, not a site where two human beings had actually lived and moved. No footprints in the dirt, no bent grass, no crumbs, no spilled coffee. None of the tiny human traces SAR teams are trained to look for. My stomach turned. "This is staged," I told Tom. "Somebody knows exactly how the Morrisons camp, but they've never actually watched real people use this gear." And free think, "The when the dimes and of minishit is not remanded." Tom shrugged. "Maybe they're just really neat campers. Looks fine to me." But the dogs didn't agree. Normally, they'd charge straight into a site, noses to the ground, eager to work. This time, both stopped dead at the perimeter, their ears flattened, low growls rumbling in their throats. When the handlers tugged their leashes, the dogs pulled back, straining to return to the trail instead. That was the moment I knew for certain. Something here was deeply, fundamentally wrong. We set up camp about a mile from the so-called Morrison campsite. The Appalachian night was still, broken only by the hum of insects and the occasional call of an owl drifting through the trees. After a long, exhausting day of searching, the rest of the team fell asleep quickly. But I couldn't. The memory of that staged campsite clung to me, the tent too perfect, the spotless cookware, and the cameras only I seemed able to see. I lay awake in my sleeping bag, ears straining in the silence. And then, it came. A woman's voice. Clear, desperate, carrying through the dark from the direction of the Morrison site. "Lisa, help us." I bolted upright, heart pounding. It was Karen Morrison's voice. I would have sworn it on my life. Her tone cracked, trembling with fear. "We're trapped. Something's keeping us here. Please, get us out." I shook Tom and a couple of the others awake. "Did you hear that? They're out there, close by." The team sat up groggily, listening, but the only sounds were the faint rustle of leaves and the steady breath of the night. Tom placed a hand on my shoulder. "Lisa, there's nothing out here. You need rest," I almost shouted. "I heard her. It was Karen. She's calling for help." Their faces showed concern, but it was for me, not for the Morrisons. But I knew I wasn't losing my mind. In that suffocating stillness, surrounded by endless dark, the whispers continued pleading, hopeless, wrapping around me in ways no one else seemed to notice. On the third day, I stopped following the Morrisons' itinerary. Instead, I followed the voices. Every step took me farther from the zones marked on our SAR maps. I knew what I was doing violated every protocol we live by. Never split from the team. Never abandon mapped areas. Never trust unverified signals. But Karen's voice was too real. Each syllable felt like it was pulling me forward, showing me where to go. That's when I realized the terrain itself was wrong. Towering rock faces jutted out of the forest, cloaked in moss and shadow, higher than anything recorded on our geological surveys. The ground sloped steeply downward, dense with bizarre limestone formations that didn't match the region at all. No matter which way I turned, The land seemed to funnel me toward a valley that shouldn't even exist. My GPS began to flicker, the coordinates jumping erratically, telling me I was standing inside what should have been nothing but solid bedrock. In my head, Karen's voice stretched out, insistent. "That's it, Lisa. Keep going. We're right ahead." And me? I was deep in a forest that didn't exist on any map, swallowing hard, telling myself I wasn't stepping into a place science had never acknowledged. After hours of chasing those voices and wandering through terrain no map recognized, I descended into a narrow valley, a valley that, according to every geological survey, simply didn't exist. That's where I found a campsite that looked real. It was nothing like the staged, picture-perfect camp from the day before. This one carried the messy imprint of actual human life. A circle of stones arranged into a fire ring with cold ashes, food wrappers scattered near the ground, a jacket tossed casually over a wooden stake, a pair of hiking boots left lying on their sides just outside the tent. The scene felt lived in, imperfect, human. I exhaled in relief. This one's real. It's the clan. But then I stepped closer. Outside the tent, two people were sitting. They wore the Morrisons' clothes. They carried the Morrisons' backpacks. I could even see their IDs sticking out of a jacket pocket. For a moment, my throat tightened with the urge to call their names until my flashlight beam swept across their faces. There were no faces, just smooth, featureless surfaces, blank, polished skin. Where eyes should have been, tiny red lenses glowed back at me, camera apertures reflecting the beam of my light. Frozen in place, I could only stare as one of them spoke. The voice that came out was Karen Morrison's, word for word, tone for tone. "The search is over. We're safe. Please tell our family we're continuing our hike and we'll be in touch soon." Every syllable was perfect. Every inflection matched. But the sound came from something that had no mouth. My chest tightened. In that instant, I understood. The Morrisons had never been found. They'd been taken, and these things, sitting in their place, were only substitutes. I stood there, paralyzed, staring at the two people by the campfire. On the surface, everything matched the navy windbreaker David always wore, the wool scarf Karen was known for, even the ID tag clipped to the strap of her pack. But the longer I looked, the truth became undeniable. These weren't people. Their faces were perfectly smooth, no mouth, no nose, just two hollow sockets, and inside them, the faint glint of tiny camera lenses. I stumbled back on instinct, my heart hammering in my chest. And then, it spoke. The voice came out clear, familiar to the point of horror. Karen Morrison's voice. "The search is over. We're safe. Please tell our family that we're continuing our trip, and we'll be in touch soon." It's not maker. Every word was precise, every cadence exact, but the sound didn't come from a throat. It came from a device. Data being replayed through a shell that wore the Morrisons' gear but not their humanity. I felt like I was staring at a flawless counterfeit of a human being built not to be real, but to deceive anyone desperate for the truth. And in that moment, I knew. David and Karen had never left this forest. I forced myself a step closer, my voice hoarse and shaking with panic. "Where are David and Karen? What have you done with them?" The two figures turned their heads in unison, the motion smooth and exact, more mechanical than organic. Then, a synthesized voice rose, not Karen, not David, but both at once, blending into one cold harmony that seemed to vibrate from their faceless heads. "They are being studied. Movement patterns, equipment usage, stress responses, all necessary data. The scientific value is significant." I felt the blood drain from my body. The voices continued, flat, unfeeling. "These replacement models exist to complete the rescue process, to assure families their loved ones have been found, to convince people like you that the mission is over. There's no reason to continue the search." My pulse thundered in my ears. It all clicked into place. The perfect campsite we found on day one, staged down to the last detail, wasn't proof of survival. It was bait, a fabrication designed to satisfy SAR protocols. And now, standing in front of me, were the final pieces of evidence. Two mannequins dressed like the Morrisons, speaking in their voices, engineered to close the file. But the real David and Karen were still out there, still being held somewhere beyond the reach of any map, beyond the grasp of any rescue team. I was still frozen by their words when both figures, suddenly tilted their heads and stepped toward me. A faint metallic sound came from the artificial joints hidden beneath their hiking clothes. A voice followed Karen Morrison's again. Warm, familiar, but hollow, like it was coming from a radio speaker. "Lisa, you can join the study too. Your rescue experience would be valuable for comparison." My chest tightened. That's when I realized they didn't just want to observe the Morrisons. They wanted me. The forest around me went dead silent, leaving only the pounding of my own heartbeat in my ears. Tiny lenses glowed inside their empty sockets, adjusting focus, dissecting my every move like cold, mechanical eyes. I took a step back. My heel crunched on loose gravel, the sound exploding in the darkness like a warning. Decide now, or there won't be a way out. I spun and ran. My boots slipped on damp soil, branches whipped across my face, and my lungs burned with every gasp. Behind me, I heard footsteps steady, perfectly in sync. Not rushed, not human. Too smooth, too precise. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, their lenses flared in the dark like electronic eyes, locked onto me. No breath, no fatigue, just silent, relentless pursuit. I yanked my GPS from my pack, praying it would guide me back to the main camp. But the screen flickered wildly, spitting out impossible coordinates, showing me both at the original search site and 30 miles away, in terrain that doesn't exist on any map. My heart felt like it would rip through my ribs. I wasn't just running to escape, I was running to hold on to some fragile shred of reality, while the forest itself seemed to slip out of the world I knew. I made it out of those woods that day. But I know the Morrison rescue never happened. The official report said, "Found safe," continuing their hike. Meanwhile, my mind still carries the image of those two mannequins, their eye sockets filled with cameras. I quit search and rescue for good. I couldn't keep standing in formation, pretending that every missing person had a reasonable explanation. But I still watch. I still read every bulletin, every SAR report out of Appalachia, and I see the same pattern, over and over. Experienced hikers vanish from familiar trails, leaving behind campsites too perfect, too staged, traces that are too clean, too convenient. They called it an accident, a wrong turn, or simply said the hikers had chosen to continue their trip. But I know better. I've seen it. These mountains, they don't just watch us, they collect. That camera network is still out there, silently recording every step, every breath of anyone who dares to go too deep into the wilderness. And if there's one thing I want you to remember, it's this.
You're listening to Untold 365 Scary True Stories. If you enjoy this video, hit the like button, click subscribe, and comment the number 2 so we know you want more chilling stories.
I've hung up my climbing boots for good, and I've never touched them again. Every harness, every carabiner, every rope gear that once felt like an extension of my own body, I sold it all. Trips I'd planned months in advance, I canceled without offering anyone a real explanation. My friends whisper behind my back that I'm going through some kind of midlife crisis. They say I've lost the fire that used to define me. But the truth is simpler and far more terrifying. The mountains have never let me go. Even now, sitting in a cramped apartment in the middle of the city, when I glance out the window toward the horizon, I hear the whispers, soft, persistent, calling my name. Every distant peak, every jagged outline against the sky, looks like a mouth slowly forming the words, urging me to come back. I may have walked away from climbing, but climbing has never walked away from me. Every time my eyes touch the horizon, even if it's just a faint ridgeline behind a curtain of haze, I hear the whispers again, faint as a breath of wind, but clear enough to make my chest tighten. They always say my name like I never really escaped that place. It doesn't matter if I'm surrounded by concrete and neon lights in the heart of the city. If a mountain is in sight, no matter how far away, that voice finds its way back. Relentless, patient. I know a part of me never came down that day. It's still trapped on the true mountain, the place where climbers ascend forever, chasing a path with no summit. And maybe, sooner or later, the rest of me will be pulled back there too. My name is David. I'm 39 years old, and for 23 years, climbing was my entire life. I've stood on snow-covered peaks in Colorado, fought through wind-battered cliffs in Montana, and even made 2 attempts at Denali, a mountain capable of breaking even the strongest climbers. But no matter how far I went, My heart always returned to the Appalachians. Those ancient, worn-down mountains, carrying the weight of centuries. There's something in them no other place can offer. In those fog-draped valleys, I feel part of my soul, as if every stone and slope has known my name since before I was born. The Appalachians weren't just where I climbed. They were my first love. I grew up on the stories of my grandmother, a full-blooded Cherokee woman. She would sit by the fire, her voice steady and low, telling me that high in the mountains lived the spirits. She said that sometimes they chose certain people, drawing them into the eternal dance between earth and sky. As a kid, I always thought those stories were just legends, tribal warnings wrapped in myth. But as I grew older, standing halfway up a cliff with my hands gripping the cracks, my heart beating in rhythm with the wind howling across the ridge, I started to understand what my grandmother had meant. It wasn't just climbing. Every time I looked upward, straining against gravity, I felt like I was touching something larger, older, something sacred that defied explanation. And deep down, I knew maybe her stories weren't just folklore after all. Grandfather Mountain, in North Carolina, had never been much of a challenge for me. For others, it could be a tough climb, but with more than 2 decades of experience, I always treated it as an easy way to breathe in the mountain air and clear my head. The plan that day was simple: hike up the tourist trail like everyone else, reach the summit, rest for a bit, then rope in and descend by the technical route on the north face. I'd done it dozens of times before. That descent always gave me a special kind of release, like washing away the weight in my mind while lowering myself down sheer rock walls, the vast valley stretching out below in ways most visitors would never see. I didn't realize then that what should have been a routine climb would become the turning point of my life. It was a clear May morning. The sky was sharp blue, the breeze cool against my skin, the temperature so perfect I couldn't imagine choosing a better day. I set out alone, as usual, carrying only a light pack and the gear I'd trusted for years. The trail up to the summit was busier than I expected. I passed a few families laughing together, couples stopping to take pictures, and solo hikers moving slowly to soak in the scenery. I nodded, traded a few words, then kept going, my boots crunching against damp earth and layers of fallen leaves. Nothing out of the ordinary, just a simple hike, almost boring for someone who had faced far greater climbs. By around noon, I reached the top of Grandfather. The observation deck was packed with tourists, their chatter and camera shutters echoing in the thin mountain air. I stepped away from the crowd, searching for a quieter spot to eat lunch and get my gear ready. Everything still seemed normal enough that I couldn't sense how close I was to the first fracture in reality. I sat down on a flat rock, opened my lunch, and let the mountain wind wash over me. Far away, the sound of tourists laughing and talking blended with the breeze, a harmless, ordinary background. I took a sip of water, eyes drifting over the green valley below, and that's when I heard it. David, my name. Not shouted, not carried on the wind, but spoken as if someone was standing right behind me, calling me in a clear, natural tone like a casual conversation. I spun around instantly. No one was there, just bare ground, a few scattered tourists, and not a single familiar face. My heart pounded harder, partly from shock, partly because the voice was achingly familiar. It sounded exactly like my grandmother, the one who had passed away 15 years ago. Gentle, drawn out, carrying a warmth I hadn't heard from anyone since the day she was gone. I sat frozen, my ears still echoing with that sound, unable to tell where the wind ended and memory began. And in that moment, I understood. Today's climb was not going to be like any other before it. I stood, my pulse still racing from the strange call, and slowly walked toward the northern edge, the spot where I had planned to begin my descent. The familiar rock face came into view, a sequence of ledges and anchor points I'd used dozens of times, but this time, something was different. Right beside the known route, a narrow path had appeared, running along the ridgeline like a scar across the stone. It twisted downward, disappearing into layers of gray rock and drifting clouds. I frowned. After all my years climbing here, I had never seen this trail. It wasn't on any map, it wasn't in my memory, and it certainly wasn't part of any established technical route. And yet, looking closer, the path carried a strange familiarity. The rock looked solid, the width just enough for careful footing, and it even seemed worn, as if others had passed through before. It was more dangerous, more demanding than my planned descent, yet, somehow, it looked possible. A silent invitation, like a door cracked open, waiting for me to step through. As I stood there hesitating, the voice returned once more. "This way, David. I've been waiting for you." I thanked the Zistri. The sound was gentle but heavy, as if it didn't just reach my ears but sank straight into my chest. I felt an invisible pull, a gravity of its own, drawing me toward that unfamiliar path. Every instinct screamed this was wrong. 23 years of climbing experience told me one rule above all. A route not on any map, unconfirmed by anyone else, was a route you should never trust. Every survival instinct I'd honed shouted for me to turn back. But my feet kept moving toward the edge. I clipped in my harness, secured the carabiner, and all the while that voice echoed in my mind, sweet, hypnotic, irresistible. I knew I was betraying my own experience, turning my back on the instincts that had kept me alive for over 2 decades. But I still did it. I stepped onto the unfamiliar path. The moment I turned onto it, the tools I'd trusted my entire climbing career began to fail me. The GPS clipped to my harness beeped frantically, its screen flickering with impossible numbers. Instead of showing the familiar elevation of Grandfather Mountain, the altitude shot upward by thousands of feet, as if I were suddenly climbing an entirely different peak. Taller, harsher, more unforgiving. I pulled the compass from its strap, desperate for something steady. But the needle spun wildly in every direction, refusing to settle on north. Every time I turned, it jerked violently, as though dragged by some invisible force deep within the mountain. The air itself grew heavy, pressing down on me. Each breath was shallow, unsatisfying, as if my lungs couldn't fill no matter how hard I tried. The weight pressed on my shoulders, turning every step into a battle against something unseen. I had climbed through the worst conditions, blizzards in Montana, skin-splitting winds on Denali, but I had never felt an atmosphere like this. It wasn't natural. It was as if something was deliberately pressing down on every breath, controlling the very air around me. And in that moment, I realized I had crossed into a place where the usual rules no longer applied. As I struggled to steady my breathing, my eyes caught on a rocky outcrop ahead. There someone was standing perfectly still. An elderly woman, slender, with long silver hair flowing in a breeze I couldn't feel on my own skin. She wore traditional clothing, the kind that looked preserved through generations, faded but immaculate. My chest tightened as recognition struck me. The lines of her face, the depth in her eyes, they were identical to my grandmother's from the old photographs I still kept. And yet, there was something timeless about her, as if age had never dared touch her. She raised her hand, beckoning me forward. And then, with a voice I never thought I'd hear again, she spoke. "It's time to come home. Thanks for watching." The sound pierced straight through me, gentle but absolute. I stood rooted to the spot, torn between two forces, my survival instincts screaming for me to turn back, and a strange longing pulling me toward her. I tilted my head back, searching the sky for a fixed point to anchor myself, and in that moment, a shiver of dread ran the length of my spine. The watch on my wrist had stopped. The second hand was frozen, unmoving, as if time itself had been locked in place around me. I looked up at the sun, and my heart sank. It hung motionless, suspended in the blue sky, not shifting an inch, even though I had been climbing for what felt like many minutes. The familiar rhythm of a day passing was gone. The sky was frozen, empty, stripped of life. Then I looked down at the valley below, and my breath caught in my throat. The tourist trails, the parking lot, the small wooden cabins, all of it had vanished. In their place stretched an endless wilderness, raw and ancient, as though lifted straight out of another age. The trees were massive, towering so high their trunks would take dozens of people linking arms just to circle one. Their canopies knitted together into a wall of green, blotting out every trace of humanity. No roads, no voices, no sign of civilization, only untouched nature. Primal, isolated, utterly still. I had climbed Grandfather Mountain dozens of times, but what lay beneath me now belonged to an era where no human had ever set foot. Scanning the ridgeline, I searched for something, anything, that could prove I was still on Grandfather Mountain. But instead, I saw them. Scattered across the ledges and steep slopes were dozens of figures, all moving steadily upward. Climbers, their bodies rigid, their motions slow but mechanical, like living clockwork. I squinted, studying them more closely, and a chill raced down my spine. Their gear wasn't like anything I'd ever seen in stores today. One wore cracked leather straps, the kind used back in the 70s. Another was dressed in a heavy wool sweater, carrying a canvas rucksack that looked ripped out of an old black and white photograph. A few others used crude iron hooks and thick hemp ropes, the sort of equipment I had only ever seen in history books. They kept climbing, never stopping, never looking back. Their faces were blank, their eyes vacant, each step void of will or individuality. And the most disturbing part, none of them were breathing hard. None showed fatigue. They just climbed, endlessly. In that instant, I knew with absolute certainty I had stepped into a place that didn't belong to the world of the living. I stood frozen, eyes locked on those silent figures, crawling up the mountainside like puppets without strings. And when I turned back, she was still there. The old woman, standing higher on the outcrop, staring down at me with eyes as deep and unfathomable as an abyss. Her voice rose again, this time not just reaching my ears, but striking directly inside my mind. Welcome to the true mountain. This is the place that exists between the living and the ancestors. I saw her lips move, but the sound didn't come from her mouth. It filled the air itself, saturating the heavy atmosphere I was struggling to breathe. You've been called for the final climb. And now this is one of their refer. Those words froze me to the core. Every survival instinct screamed for me to turn back and run. But at the same time, something deep within me, something faint, yet undeniable, quivered in agreement, as if my very blood recognized her words as truth. I couldn't tell if I was hearing echoes from another world, or from a part of my soul that the mountain had claimed long ago. But I knew one thing. If I took even one more step toward her, there would be no return. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing myself to take a deep breath. When I opened them again, my chest tightened like I had fallen into a pit. That wasn't my grandmother. The face, though identical down to each wrinkle and strand of silver hair, now revealed something in the eyes, something no human could ever possess. A hollow coldness, like a black void waiting to consume every ounce of will inside me. My whole body shook. At last, instinct regained control. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the emergency beacon, the satellite device I always carried on solo climbs. My fingers felt stiff, clumsy, as if they no longer belonged to me. I fumbled, pressing again and again, until I finally hit the activation button. Beep, beep, beep. The sound was faint, but in the frozen silence around me, it echoed like thunder. A tiny light blinked, sending out its distress signal. For a fleeting moment, I thought I had regained a piece of reality, a foothold against whatever force surrounded me. But then, I realized I had provoked something that should never have been disturbed. The beacon's beeping had barely begun when the entire mountain shuddered under a scream that ripped through the air. The woman on the outcrop, the thing wearing my grandmother's face, opened her mouth, and from it poured a roar that sounded like stones splitting apart, like storms tearing through endless canyons. You cannot leave. You've been chosen. Each word slammed into my spine, rattling my entire body. There was no trace of gentleness left in that voice, only a cold fury, like a command rising straight from the heart of the mountain. I glanced around and my heart nearly stopped. The scattered climbers across the slope had all frozen. Their heads turned in unison toward me, and in an instant their vacant eyes transformed into something else, an awful mix of hunger and desperation without end. Then, as if on cue, they surged forward. No more slow, mechanical steps. Now they scrambled, clawed, and launched themselves across the rock with inhuman speed. The air erupted with noise stone cracking under their weight, frantic breaths, and the thunder of loose rocks tumbling into the abyss. It was chaos given form, and I knew if I stayed frozen even a second longer, I'd become one of them. I yanked hard on the rope and hurled myself downward in a reckless descent that any instructor would have called suicidal. Technique and safety meant nothing now. Every slip, every short free fall made my stomach lurch, but the sounds behind me, the woman's scream, and the pounding rush of those figures closing in were far worse. I didn't dare look back. I only heard the mountain shuddering, stones splitting under their grasp as they clawed for me. But then, as I slid farther down the rope, something strange began to happen. The climbers started to blur. At first, it was small details, their rusted hooks flickering into streaks of light, their hollow eyes dissolving into smoke. Then, one by one, their bodies unraveled into shadows, torn apart like storm clouds scattering in the wind. I kept going, gasping for breath, chest burning like it was about to explode. Every foot of rope sliding through my hands felt like another chance to survive. And then, my boots hit solid ground. I collapsed onto the damp earth, lungs heaving. When I lifted my head, my stomach dropped. This wasn't the mountain base I knew. No parking lot, no observation deck, no trace of the tourist trail. Only a wild, unfamiliar stretch of land cloaked in darkness, as if I'd dropped into another version of Grandfather Mountain, a place that didn't exist on any map. I sank to the ground, body trembling, my mind clinging to one desperate thought. Let the beacon work. Please, let someone find me. Then faint. At first I heard it, the rhythmic chop of helicopter blades carrying through the air. I had never heard anything so close to salvation. 3 hours later, the rescue team finally reached me, but not where I thought I was. They found me slumped by the side of a road, completely drained, sitting next to a strip of asphalt that, according to every official map, didn't exist. They checked and rechecked, but had no explanation. The rescue crew told me my beacon signal had been erratic the entire time. One moment it showed me near the summit, the next it jumped miles away, as if I'd been moving between locations faster than humanly possible. When I was taken to the hospital, the doctors ran every test they could. My blood showed no toxins. My brain scans revealed no signs of stroke or seizure. Psychological evaluations confirmed I was clear, stable, fully aware. Every result pointed to me being perfectly fine. But I know the truth. What I experienced on Grandfather Mountain wasn't a hallucination, and it wasn't some trick of my mind. It was real, and a part of me never came back down. It's still trapped there, on the true mountain where climbers ascend forever, chasing a summit that doesn't exist. A part of me is still trapped there. I know it sounds unbelievable, but the truth is, I never really left those mountains. They cling to me even now, as I sit in a brightly lit room, with the sound of traffic outside my window, trying to tell you this story. I need to leave a warning for anyone listening. If the mountains ever call your name, don't answer. Don't follow the whispers that echo across ridges and valleys. I heard them once, and I barely made it back. I gathered all my genealogy work, birth certificate copies, faded photos, family charts, and packed them into a metal box behind my house. Then, I set it on fire. The flames turned years of research into ash, and all I could think was, I will never keep digging into this again. I walked away from it all. I left Appalachia. I moved halfway across the country, believing distance would set me free. But I was wrong. In the quietest nights, when the city outside grows still and my apartment sinks into silence, I still hear it. A woman's voice, soft, patient, calling my name. It slips through concrete walls, past locked doors, whispering right beside me. Every time, my chest tightens, because I know, no matter how far I run, it can still find me. Before all this, I lived for one passion: genealogy. I loved piecing together fragments of the past, weaving them into a story that made sense. For 5 years, I dug into my mother's side of the family. I spent countless hours in libraries, carefully copying yellowed birth records, combing through census reports, and standing among fog-covered Appalachian graveyards, tracing names that were nearly worn away on headstones. I felt like a detective, unearthing secrets time had tried to bury. I didn't realize that some secrets were never meant to be uncovered. One mystery haunted me through it all. My great-great-grandmother, Abigail Thornton. Her name first appeared in the 1890 census. Before that, nothing. No birth record, no church record, no trace of her existence. It was as if she had stepped out of nowhere, suddenly appearing in a remote valley in eastern Kentucky, married to my great-great-grandfather. I still remember the chill down my spine as I stared at the faded line of text on my computer screen. Surrounded by names with clear roots and records, hers stood alone, isolated, almost intrusive, like a shadow forced into the flow of history. And I couldn't stop asking myself, who was she? And why was there no sign of her before that? When every lead collapsed into dead ends, a message suddenly appeared on a genealogy forum. It was from a distant relative I had never met. He claimed he knew where Abigail's original house still stood. He said it was deep inside the Daniel Boone National Forest, hidden in a valley so remote it didn't even show up on modern maps. I read that message over and over, my heart pounding equal parts excitement and dread. The thought that a buried piece of my family's past might still exist, not just on paper, but in wood, stone, and earth, lit a fire in me. But I had no idea that what I saw as a discovery would become the doorway to the darkest chapter of my life. That relative introduced me to Ezra Caldwell, the unofficial historian of the region. When I called him, his voice came through the phone thick with a mountain drawl, each word stretched out as if pulled from someplace far away. He boasted that his family had kept records, even the county never had land deeds, marriages, deaths no outsider would ever know about. We agreed to meet one October morning at a small gas station in Whitesburg. Ezra appeared exactly as I had pictured, a wiry man in his 70s, calloused hands, a face weathered by time, and sharp blue eyes that seemed to cut right through you. He said he'd take me into the valley, but warned me first. The road was rough, isolated, and maps couldn't always be trusted. "These roads," he muttered in that flat, steady voice, "they change in their own way." At the time, I thought it was just a metaphor. Now, I wish I'd listened. I'd left Ohio before dawn, my car packed with gear camera, laptop, portable scanner, everything I needed to capture every detail. This wasn't just a trip. To me, it felt like an excavation. I had prepared like an archaeologist heading into the field. By the time I rolled into Whitesburg, the sky was heavy with gray clouds. The gas station was a relic rusting pumps, a faded sign, the air thick with fuel and exhaust. That's where I saw Ezra waiting beside an old pickup, its body streaked with rust. He swore it was the only vehicle that could handle the mountain roads we were about to face. I can still picture that moment. A chilly October morning, the weight of anticipation buzzing in my chest, completely unaware that I was stepping into a journey I would never escape unchanged. Ezra's truck roared to life like an aging beast, rattling with every jolt. The narrow mountain road kept me holding my breath, one side crumbling into a steep drop that seemed endless. The tires bounced through potholes, skidded over rain-cut ruts, and sent loose rocks clattering down into the dark below. While I gripped the door handle for dear life, Ezra drove with unnerving calm. He began telling stories families who settled these valleys in the 1,800 seconds, feuds that lasted generations, vanishings that were never explained. His words, low and steady, blended with the groan of the old engine, echoing off the cliffs. Each tale made the air feel heavier, as if the mountains themselves were listening, unwilling to let go of the blood and sorrow buried in their soil. When the truck could go no farther, we left the road behind and started walking deeper into the valley. That's when I noticed it. The forest was silent. Not peaceful, unnervingly silent. And in that stillness, my stomach turned with the realization something wasn't right. There were no birds singing, no squirrels darting through the branches, not even the usual rustle of small animals moving in the undergrowth. Only the faint brush of wind through the canopy, and even that sound felt swallowed whole. Even our footsteps crushing dry leaves, pressing into damp soil, didn't echo the way they should. Each step was muffled, absorbed into a silence so heavy it made my chest tighten. It felt like an invisible veil had fallen over us, forcing me to lower my voice, as if the forest itself would not allow a sound to rise. At last, the trail opened into a clearing, and in the very center of it, I froze. A 2-story log house stood tall, looking as though it had been built yesterday. The timbers were polished smooth, the seams sealed tight, the roof showing no trace of wear. Even the glass windows caught the late afternoon sun, gleaming without a single crack. My heart raced, because I knew the truth. According to the records, this house was more than a century old. By all rights, it should have been nothing but a pile of rotting wood. I turned to Ezra. He stood pale, eyes locked on the house. Then he whispered, his voice raw and unsteady. "No, it didn't look like this the last time I was here." I pushed against the heavy wooden door. It groaned but gave way easily. Inside, sunlight poured through spotless panes, catching dust motes in the air. But the layer was strangely thin, not like a place abandoned for 100 years, more like a home where someone had lived just days ago and left in a hurry. Furniture was intact, too intact. In the main room, a rough-hewn wooden table stood ready. Tin plates and cups were laid out neatly, as if waiting for a family meal. By the door, clothes hung on wooden pegs, a faded woman's dress still whole, a man's work shirt faintly carrying the scent of smoke and sweat. I stepped back half a pace, my pulse thundering. The air felt thick, like I had broken into someone's life, not uncovered a relic from the past. Hands trembling, I pulled out my camera. This could be the most important proof of my entire research. I flicked the switch. Nothing. The screen stayed black, battery full, but the device was dead in my hands. A chill shot down my spine. I tried my phone. Full bars, strong signal. But the second I opened the camera app, the screen blinked and shut down like something unseen had gripped it tight. I stood frozen in the daylight-filled room, realizing both of my most advanced tools, the devices I trusted to capture the truth, had become nothing more than lifeless blocks of plastic in my hands. In the silence, I could hear my own heartbeat pounding so loud it echoed in my ears. And for the first time, I understood there are places that will not let you carry the truth back out. I stepped outside, desperate for air, trying to steady myself. That's when my eyes locked onto the ground near the foundation of the house. Footprints. Small, narrow, clearly a woman's shoes. The steps circled the house, pausing at each window, as if someone had quietly peered inside. But what made my breath catch was that there were no tracks leading away, no path leaving the house. The prints just stopped, vanishing into nothing. Ezra, do you see this? I turned back. Empty space. He was gone. No footsteps, no sound, no trace of him in the unnaturally still woods. In a blink, my guide had disappeared, as if he had never been there at all. A cold wave ran down my spine. For the first time in my life, I felt truly alone, standing in a place that didn't belong to people. I forced myself back inside, every step heavy, as though the floor itself resisted me. In the main room's corner, a narrow wooden staircase led upward. Each step creaked beneath my weight, the sound unnervingly sharp in the thick silence. My heartbeat quickened with every rise. At the landing, I drew a deep breath and stepped into the first room. A simple wooden bed sat against the wall. The sheets and blanket were neatly arranged, tucked tight like in a hotel room, not a speck of dust, no mark of time at all. I staggered back half a step, a chill crawling through me. This house was supposed to have been abandoned for over a century, so why was the bed perfectly made? As if someone had left just this morning. On a small wooden dresser at the bedside, a row of framed photographs was arranged neatly. I bent down, lifting one into my hand, and felt my blood run cold. Every face in every photo had been violently scratched out. Deep gouges carved across the glass, jagged lines like someone clawing in a frenzy. The bodies in their old-fashioned clothing stood stiffly in family portraits, but the faces, the only pieces that could tell me who they were gone. My hands shook as I lifted a larger frame. It was a family portrait taken right in front of this very house, sometime in the 1890 seconds. A man, a woman, and 3 children. The woman's face had been scratched into a blur of white scars, but the man's, though faded and hazy, I could still see the features. The cheekbones, the eyes, the shape of the nose so familiar it made my heart clench. He looked almost exactly like me. I slowly set the frame back down, my hand trembling. One question pounded in my head, one I didn't dare answer. Was I staring at my ancestor, or at a reflection of myself? As I stood in the dim glow of late afternoon, another sound crept into my ears, so faint, at first I thought I was imagining it. Whispers. A man's voice. A woman's voice. Urgent, sharp, like 2 people arguing, but warped, distorted like words, bubbling up through water. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to speak. Hello? Is someone down there? The voices cut off instantly. Silence fell thick, suffocating. I could hear nothing but my own heartbeat pounding, echoing inside my chest, filling a space that had no echo before. I drew in a deep breath and stepped onto the stairs. Each wooden plank groaned beneath me, every creak hitting the silence like a hammer. When I reached the main floor, I froze. Fresh footprints, wet, heavy, smeared in mud, circling the room in clear patterns. They hadn't been there minutes ago. And in the far corner of the room, where I swore there had been nothing before, stood a heavy wooden door, set flush into the floor. slightly open. A cold, damp draft rose from the gap. For a moment, I just stood there, paralyzed. Then, almost against my will, my hand pushed the door wider. A wooden staircase plunged down into absolute darkness. I switched on the flashlight on my phone and, strangely, this time it worked. Each step groaned under my weight as I descended. The air shifted immediately. Damp earth, a sickly sweet stench, mixed with something acrid, rotting. My throat tightened. The cellar was far larger than the house above it. Rough stone walls loomed cold and wet. Along one wall, rows of shelves sagged under the weight of glass jars, shapes inside glinting, shapes I didn't want to look at too closely. At the center stood a massive wooden table, its surface carved with strange markings. Dark stains spread across the grain, rust-colored, but I knew better than to believe it was rust. Scattered across the table were dozens of journals, every one written in the same hand, a woman's hand, elegant, looping, but pressed hard, frantic, like words spilling out under obsession. My own hand shook as I opened the first book. The very first line froze the blood in my veins. I flipped through page after page, my pulse hammering faster with every word. Decades of entries, each one circling back to the same subject. My family. One entry described my grandfather's visit in 1962. He chose to stay. Another, about my uncle in 1983. He understood the purpose. And then, on the most recent page, the writing trembled but was unmistakably clear. Ezra brought him here. The family will be complete. My name, Marcus, inked in fading strokes, yet shining on the page as if it had been written yesterday. At that exact moment, the cellar door above slammed shut. The heavy thud echoed off the stone walls, nearly knocking me off my feet. I rushed up the stairs, shoving against the hatch, but it wouldn't move. Something massive had been set across it. Then came the footsteps. Many of them. Heavy ones, light ones, circling, pacing, pressing against the wood above me. And then, the voices. My grandfather's voice, he'd been gone since I was 12, calling my name. My uncle's familiar laugh, rising out of childhood memory. And then a woman's voice, soft, drawn out, almost tender. Marcus, come up. It's time to come home. Time for the family to be whole again. There, Arcast, I shouted, clawing at the wall with my keys, prying loose chunks of mortar until my hands bled. Above me, the voices grew louder, calm, patient, coaxing, weaving into my mind until I thought they might break me. At last, I carved a gap wide enough to squeeze through. I dragged myself out, tumbling into the forest behind the house. When I looked up, I froze. The house had changed. Now it appeared exactly as it should have, rotting, roof sagging, windows shattered. But through the broken panes, light still flickered, and figures moved silently in and out of the frames. I didn't dare look again. I ran. Branches tore at my face, ripped my clothes, but I kept running until I collapsed onto a dirt road. There, Ezra's old truck, parked exactly where we'd left it, the keys waiting in the ignition. But Ezra himself was nowhere to be found. I drove down the mountain at reckless speed, tires skidding, certain they would fly off the rim at any moment. I didn't stop until I saw the glow of the gas station where we had met that morning. When I reported Ezra missing, the officer's reply froze the blood in my veins. Ezra Caldwell had been reported missing back in 1987. His truck had been found at the bottom of a ravine. His body was never recovered. 3 years have gone by, but every night I still jolt awake, heart pounding, body drenched in cold sweat. I can't even remember the last time I had a peaceful night's sleep. In the darkness of my room, with only the faint glow of a streetlight slipping through the blinds, I often sit frozen, listening, as if waiting for something to reveal itself. My family says I'm imagining things. They tell me it's just stress, that I should see a therapist. And I did try. But how do you explain the feeling of invisible eyes watching you every single second? How do you explain the chill crawling across your skin, even when the AC is turned off, or the sharp scent of pine and hemlock drifting through an apartment in the middle of the city? I've moved twice. Each time I thought I was finally free. But that feeling, that suffocating sense of being stared at from some empty corner of the room never left. Whether I lived high up in the chaos of the city, or in a quieter complex, I knew one thing. Whatever followed me from the Appalachian Mountains wasn't done with me. When I started that trip, my plan was simple. A short backpacking run, just one more night alone in the woods, to soak in the silence I always thought of as medicine for my soul. 3 days, 3 nights, that was the plan. I packed enough food, water, and as always, felt confident. I knew every bend of that trail, but that morning, something shifted. It wasn't fear exactly, more like instinct. Sharp and undeniable. It hit me so hard I stopped in the middle of the path, heart racing, every hair on my arm standing on end. It felt like a voice I couldn't hear was whispering one command: leave now. I knew the hike back to my Jeep was about 12 miles. Normally, with a steady pace, I could cover it in a day. But I braced myself to push harder. No stopping for views, no long breaks. Just keep moving. Just get out. I had gone about 4 miles when the dread hit me. This trail I knew by heart, wasn't the same anymore. I froze, stomach sinking like a stone. The landmarks I'd memorized, a split oak tree, a moss-covered boulder, were gone. In their place, a fork appeared where none had ever been. The forest was so silent, I could hear nothing but my own heartbeat slamming in my chest. I pulled out my GPS, desperate for reassurance. But the screen showed something impossible. According to the device, I was standing in the middle of a lake that didn't exist on any map or in reality. Sunlight still filtered down through the canopy, but in that moment I felt the woods shift, twisting into a maze that wanted me trapped. I lifted my eyes and my heart stopped. On a ridge, 200 yards away, a figure stood motionless. It was tall, rigid like a stone pillar, its entire body cloaked in fabric so dark it didn't reflect sunlight, it swallowed it. The figure looked solid, dense, like a cutout of pure void standing there in broad daylight. I lifted my hand and waved, my voice raw as I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" My words echoed back, shattering in the thin air of the forest. But the figure didn't move. It didn't step forward, didn't retreat. It only stood there, fixed on me. In that moment, I felt a crushing weight press against my chest, as if the entire forest had stopped breathing along with me. Panic surged. I abandoned what little reason I had left and bolted not along the trail, but straight into the underbrush. Branches lashed across my face and arms like whips, leaving burning welts. My clothes and pack tore open, zippers snapping loose. I stumbled hard, knees and palms ripping open, blood smearing across dirt and rotting leaves. My breathing turned ragged, every inhale slicing through my ears like static. But the worst part wasn't the pain. It was the sound behind me, the footsteps. Not rushed, not frantic, just steady, measured, like the ticking of a clock echoing in the silence. It didn't need to run. Each deliberate step carried a cold certainty. It knew I wouldn't escape. I can't recall how long I ran. Time stretched and snapped, reduced to nothing but my racing heartbeat and those footsteps pounding behind me like a hammer inside my skull. My legs finally gave out, and I crashed forward onto unforgiving ground. But my hands didn't hit damp forest soil this time. They scraped across gravel, sharp and cold. I looked up. A gravel road stretched out between 2 rows of trees. I didn't recognize it, but it meant only one thing. I had found a way out. I staggered along that road, body trembling, until warm lights appeared in the distance. A house. I nearly collapsed on the porch, pounding on the door in desperation. The homeowner opened it, eyes wide as they took in my shredded clothes and dirt-streaked skin. They didn't ask questions, just grabbed the phone and called the sheriff. For a moment, I thought I was safe. But deep inside my chest, I still heard it. Those slow, steady footsteps that had never really stopped. 2 days later, the police contacted me. The search and rescue team had found my Jeep, still parked at the little gravel lot where my hike began. But what they told me next froze my blood. My tent was no longer intact. My sleeping bag, my cook pot, even the 3 days' worth of food I had packed gone. On the ground were clear signs that someone had used my gear to camp. Not just for a night. The deputies said it looked like someone had been living there for weeks. I was stunned. I had only been in the woods for 2 days. How could that be possible? How could the evidence point to a presence that had been there so much longer? The officers kept writing in their reports, their voices calm, but to me the whole scene twisted and warped. I couldn't shake the question. Who or what had used my food and supplies? Even now, I can't make sense of it. That trail, a path I had memorized over years, how could it change right before my eyes? How could familiar landmarks disappear and be replaced by forks in the path that never existed before? And how could my belongings end up somewhere else, laid out as if someone had been living off them for weeks, when I had barely spent 48 hours out there? But the most haunting image burned into me is this: the footprints that appeared and vanished without a trace, and that towering figure on the ridge, standing motionless, watching me in silence. Those memories are etched into my mind, unerasable no matter how hard I try to forget. Many nights, sitting alone in my apartment, surrounded by concrete walls and the glare of headlights outside, I still sense something I cannot explain. The air turns heavy, thick with the sharp, resinous scent of freshly cut hemlock. I swear I can smell the mountain wind, too cold, damp, and dense, slipping in through the cracks, even though I live hundreds of miles away from Appalachia. Every time it happens, my chest tightens, my throat goes dry, and I know whatever was in those woods has never truly let me go. It lingers in every breath I take, reminding me it is still watching, even when I thought I had escaped. I don't doubt anymore. Something ancient, tied to the Appalachian Mountains, wanted me to stay. It doesn't appear on any map. It doesn't leave signs the way ordinary things do, but I know it's still there. I can feel invisible eyes pressing through the shadows in my room, sense its presence in every stretch of silence. And on the quietest nights, when the city outside finally falls asleep, I hear it whispering my name. Soft, drawn out, like wind cutting through a hollow ridge. A call that never stops, reminding me the Appalachian Trail is still waiting for me to return, and next time, I might never make it out again.